Welcome to Info Nova. Your life was written before you were born, and it's still being written right now. Not by fate, not by chance, but by a field of consciousness so vast, so ancient, that it remembers everything your soul has ever done, felt, or dreamed. There is a place, if you could call it a place, that holds every thought, every intention, every karmic imprint of every being that has ever lived. A field so silent, most never hear it, so subtle, most never sense it, and yet it is always there, just beyond the veil of ordinary awareness. You felt it before, in the stillness of meditation, in the strange clarity of déjà vu, in dreams that feel more real than waking life. The ancients called it Akasha. Mystics knew it by intuition. Today, we call it the Akashic Records. But make no mistake, this isn't some New Age fantasy. This is the blueprint behind your reality. And once you see it, you'll never see yourself the same way again. There's a reason you sometimes feel like your life is part of a story you don't fully understand, like you've been dropped into a chapter mid-book with no memory of the pages that came before. That feeling isn't imagination, it's intuition. Deep down, something in you knows that your soul has lived far more than this single life. It knows there's a record of those lives, and that they didn't vanish when you were born into this one. That record has a name, and it's been whispered about for thousands of years across continents, traditions, and time. The Akashic Records. The Akashic Records are not a book. They're not physical. They're not locked away in some ancient building or buried beneath the earth. They exist in a dimension beyond time, beyond space, a non-physical field of consciousness that acts like a spiritual database. Imagine a vibrational archive that stores not only your actions, but your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, every decision you've ever made, every lesson you've been meant to learn, every lifetime you've lived. And not just you, everyone, every soul, every experience. This is not a concept for the chosen few. This is the terrain of consciousness itself. The term Akashic comes from the Sanskrit word Akasha, meaning ether or spirit. It is the fifth element in ancient Indian cosmology, beyond earth, water, fire, and air, representing the subtle energetic substance from which all things emerge. To the ancients, Akasha wasn't just a poetic idea. It was the invisible thread connecting all of existence, the field through which divine intelligence expresses itself, and the records are what that field remembers. This isn't some niche corner of metaphysics. Versions of this idea exist in almost every mystical tradition. The Hebrews spoke of the Book of Life. The ancient Egyptians believed in a hall of records. In Islam, there's the Alawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet that records all things. And in modern Western esotericism, thinkers like Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner spoke extensively of a spiritual memory field that transcends the limits of our senses. They weren't inventing it, they were remembering it. If you've ever wondered why some people seem born with a kind of wisdom, or why you've had unexplained fears, uncanny abilities, or deep emotional reactions that feel far older than this life, you're not crazy. You're sensing echoes from the records. You are more than your current circumstances. You are a soul carrying layers of experience, and those layers are not random. They're patterns, part of a larger curriculum that your soul agreed to explore. But until you become aware of those patterns, they keep playing out unconsciously, lifetime after lifetime. And this is where the records become more than a concept. They become a key, a map, a compass pointing back to yourself. Because within them, there are answers, not just about who you were, but about who you're becoming. There are insights waiting to be heard, lessons waiting to be integrated, and a truth most people never even get close to. that your purpose is not something you invent, it's something you remember. Some truths can't be shared here, but they're too important to hide. Sign up to Insights Academy through the link in the description and receive a free digital copy of the Kabbalion while it's still available. Because here's what they won't tell you. The records aren't off limits, they're just off radar. Most people never even try to access them, not because they're not capable, but because they were never told it was possible. They were taught that knowledge lives in books, that authority lives in institutions, that answers must come from outside. But the records say otherwise. They say the highest knowledge isn't learned, it's recalled. You don't need to be a guru or a psychic to touch this wisdom. You just need to get quiet enough to hear what's already echoing inside you. The Akashic field doesn't favor the elite. It responds to intention, to sincerity, to readiness. So the question isn't, can you access the records? The question is, what happens when you do? Long before the term Akashic records was ever coined, there were those who knew, not in theory, but through direct experience, visionaries, mystics, seers, and sages who touched something beyond the veil and brought back messages written in light, not ink. They didn't call it a record because what they encountered wasn't language, it was truth in its purest, most vibrational form. Across continents and cultures, they whispered about a place, if you could even call it that, where the memories of the soul were kept, guarded not by walls, but by frequency. And those who reached it didn't read it with their eyes, they felt it in their bones. The Vedic rishis of ancient India spoke of the Akasha as the primal substance of all reality, the origin of all form and all thought. In their worldview, nothing was ever truly lost. It simply returned to Akasha, like a ripple folding back into the ocean. Tibetan mystics referred to this same field as the mind stream, a flow of consciousness that transcends individual lifetimes. The Druids, the Egyptians, the Gnostics, the Mayans, they all had their own names for it. Different languages, different symbols, but the same knowing that there exists an invisible domain which remembers everything. So what happened to this knowledge? It didn't disappear. It was dismantled, marginalized, rebranded as superstition by institutions that feared its implications. Because if the soul has memory, then the self is not defined by nationality, religion, or even biology. If the records are real, then authority must be internal, not imposed, and that is a dangerous idea to systems built on control. During colonization, many indigenous cultures with oral traditions of soul memory were forcibly silenced. Sacred ceremonies, ones that opened the intuitive channels to the Akasha, were outlawed, mocked, or replaced. The burning of ancient libraries, the demonization of pagan practices, the rewriting of spiritual history, it was all part of the same effort to sever the connection between human beings and the knowledge that lives beyond the five senses. Even today, in the age of rationalism, the idea of the Akashic records is often dismissed as pseudoscience or fantasy.
Yet those same critics cannot explain why children remember past lives, or why people who have never met before can share the same dream, or why ancient texts across civilizations describe identical experiences of soul memory with uncanny precision. It's not that the evidence doesn't exist, it's that it doesn't fit the narrative, because a society built on consumption and obedience cannot function if its people start asking, who was I before this? And what if the story I was told isn't the full story? So instead, you were given a new story, one that said you are your name, your job, your race, your gender. Your past starts with your birth certificate and ends with your death certificate. Everything else? Fairy tales. But beneath that story, the older one has been quietly waiting. The one encoded in dreams you couldn't explain, the one whispered during moments of silence, when the noise of the world fades and you can finally hear your own knowing. This isn't about replacing religion or proving a point or claiming secret knowledge. It's about remembrance. It's about reclaiming a truth that was taken not by violence alone, but by ridicule, by distraction, by forgetting. The Akashic records are not new. They are ancient beyond comprehension. What's new is that more people are waking up to them again. And maybe that's why you're here. Not to learn something brand new, but to remember something timeless, something your ancestors once knew before it was torn from their tongues, something your soul has been trying to show you all along. Because when you realize that history isn't just written in books, but in energy, in frequency, in you, you begin to reclaim the story no one else can write for you. You don't need a library card to access the Akashic records. You don't need permission from an institution, a degree, or a spiritual hierarchy. The records were never built to be owned or guarded. They were meant to be felt, remembered, and lived. This is what makes them different from every other source of knowledge. They respond not to intellect, but to frequency. You don't read them with your eyes. You align with them. You tune into them. Like a radio dial, your awareness shifts into a state where the static clears and the signal becomes audible. People have been doing this for thousands of years, even when they didn't have a name for it. It happens in deep meditation, in altered states of consciousness, in dreams that seem to show other lifetimes or forgotten memories. It can happen spontaneously during grief, intense joy, or moments of complete stillness. But the access point is always presence. You can't bulldoze your way into the records. You soften into them. You surrender into awareness so still, so honest, that your energy matches the frequency of truth itself. Mystics and sages often speak of the records as a vibrational field. That's because what they contain isn't a language you're used to. It's not sentences or paragraphs. It's knowing. It's resonance. Sometimes people describe seeing the records as a massive library or an ancient temple filled with scrolls and light. Others experience it as colors, sounds, or symbols that don't translate into words but make total sense emotionally. That's the key. The records don't speak to your logical brain. They speak directly to the soul. Modern spiritual practitioners have developed methods for entering this space consciously. Some use guided meditations or prayers, like the Pathway Prayer popularized by Linda Howe. Others access the records through automatic writing, allowing the subconscious to translate what the conscious mind can't yet perceive. Breathwork, plant medicine, lucid dreaming, and astral projection have also served as gateways for those prepared to explore the deeper terrain of consciousness. But no single method is universal. The technique is less important than the intention. Intention is everything. If you go into the records looking for proof, control, or entertainment, you'll likely find nothing at all. But if you approach with reverence, curiosity, and the willingness to be changed, the field responds. And it's not always comfortable. The records don't flatter your ego. They show you patterns, truths, loops you've repeated across lifetimes, wounds you've carried longer than your own name. But they also show you your power, untapped, ancient, waiting to be remembered. They offer clarity in places where you've been confused for years, and they whisper the same message over and over again. You are more than you've been told. What's wild is that many people have already accessed the records without even realizing it. That intuitive knowing that saved you from a bad decision, that strange moment when you knew what someone would say before they said it, that unexplainable pull toward a place, a person, or a path. These aren't coincidences. They're echoes, glimpses through the veil. Your soul trying to speak through the noise of a world designed to keep you distracted. And the truth is, accessing the Akashic records isn't about escaping this world. It's about embodying your full self in this world. It's not a way to bypass reality. It's a way to see it clearly, past the illusion, past the conditioning, down to the root. When you access the records, you don't just remember who you were, you remember who you came here to be. And that kind of memory isn't passive. It moves you.
It reshapes how you walk through life. It reshapes how you respond to challenges, how you see others, and how you tell your own story. Because once you've stood inside the infinite and seen your place in it, nothing can convince you that you're small, broken, or powerless ever again. You didn't come here empty. You didn't arrive on this planet as a blank slate, randomly thrown into a chaotic world. You came with a blueprint, a soul-level design shaped by lifetimes of experience, intention, and consequence. Akashic records hold that blueprint. They don't just contain information about who you've been. They map out the energetic residue of those experiences, what some call karma, what others call soul memory, but what is at its core the spiritual architecture of your evolution. Karma has been misunderstood by many. It's not punishment. It's not cosmic retribution for doing something wrong. Karma is memory. It's momentum. It's energy echoing forward, seeking resolution, balance, and growth. Think of it as an unfinished chord that needs to be completed. If you betrayed someone in one life, you may feel a deep need to protect others in this one. If you silenced your truth for years, you might now feel compelled to speak, even if your voice shakes. These aren't random traits, they're threads, emotional and energetic patterns woven through lifetimes, creating continuity in your soul's story. And then there are soul contracts. These are not rigid scripts, but agreements made at the soul level before incarnation. Arrangements to meet certain people, face particular challenges, or experience specific lessons. That toxic relationship, that impossible parent, that mentor who appeared at just the right time, these aren't always accidents. They may be part of a deeper contract, a mutual agreement to catalyze growth in each other. No matter how difficult the process, the Akashic records allow us to glimpse these contracts, not so we can escape the pain, but so we can understand its purpose.
This is why the records are not just repositories of information. They are mirrors of transformation. When you access your soul's blueprint, you begin to see your struggles differently. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" You begin to notice the repeating cycles, the same lesson showing up in different disguises, the same kind of heartbreak, the same fear, the same self-sabotage. And when you see the pattern, you gain the power to rewrite it, because awareness breaks the cycle. And choice, once made with full consciousness, becomes the seed of transformation. There's also something sacred about seeing your gifts through the lens of the records. We often focus on wounds when we talk about past lives, but wisdom travels too. Talents, strengths, even spiritual abilities can cross over. That inexplicable pull toward healing, teaching, or creating. It might not be new. It might be something your soul has been mastering for lifetimes. And the records help you remember not only where the pain started, but where the power lives. Understanding your soul blueprint also dissolves comparison, because once you realize everyone is on a unique evolutionary path, the need to match someone else's timeline disappears. You begin to honor your own process. You stop rushing. You stop blaming. You start trusting that your challenges are not obstacles, they are activations. The Akashic records reveal the soul's curriculum, and once you see that, even your biggest setbacks begin to feel like sacred assignments. But the most liberating truth of all, your blueprint is fluid. The past may shape the present, but it doesn't trap it. Karma is not a life sentence. Soul contracts can be rewritten. Patterns can be broken. This is not about determinism, it's about awareness. The records don't chain you to a fate, they offer you a map, but you still choose the path. You still carry the pen. And in every moment, you are either repeating an old pattern or initiating a new cycle entirely. So when you ask, "What is my purpose?" you're not waiting for the answer to descend from the sky. You're being invited to remember what your soul already knows. The blueprint has always been inside you.
The records are simply the key to decoding it. For most people, the idea of the Akashic record sounds poetic at best, something belonging to the world of mystics and metaphysics, a comforting metaphor for those who believe in something more. But what if it's not just a metaphor? What if what ancient sages described as a spiritual library is something that modern science is only now beginning to glimpse through the lens of energy fields, quantum theory, and consciousness studies that challenge everything we thought we knew about reality? There's a reason mainstream science has largely ignored the Akashic records. They don't fit neatly within the materialist worldview. You can't put the records under a microscope, measure them with a ruler, or quantify them in a lab. But consciousness itself, your thoughts, dreams, memories, can't be measured either. And yet, you know they exist. The records may not be physical, but neither is the internet signal that lets you read this. Now, unseen doesn't mean unreal. Physicists have long known that reality isn't as solid as it appears. At the quantum level, everything is energy, vibrating, interconnected, dynamic. What we perceive as form is just a dense arrangement of frequencies. Information, it turns out, may be the foundation of the universe. Not matter, not even energy. Information. This is where the idea of a field of stored data becomes more than mysticism. It becomes a viable model of reality. The late Ervin Laszlo, a systems philosopher and two-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, introduced the concept of the Akashic field as a universal information field that underlies all of creation. According to his theory, the universe is not a random accident, but a coherent system driven by information stored in the Akashic field. He didn't pull this from ancient texts. He found parallels between cutting-edge physics and the timeless wisdom of spiritual traditions. To him, the Akashic records weren't a fantasy. They were a scientific inevitability waiting to be understood. Then there's the holographic universe theory championed by scientists like David Bohm and Carl Pribram. It suggests that the universe functions like a hologram, where each part contains the whole. That means all information is encoded everywhere at all times. Every cell in your body holds the imprint of your entire genetic code. Every point in the field could potentially hold the memory of every moment, every life, every possibility. Sound familiar? These theories don't prove the Akashic records in the traditional sense, but they do open the door. They challenge the lie we've been told, that we are isolated, separate beings in a dead mechanical universe. Instead, they point to something far more intimate, a cosmos woven with intelligence, memory, and interconnection, a field that remembers, a universe that knows itself through you. Even near-death experiences, which were once dismissed as hallucinations, now offer clues. Many who return describe a realm of knowing, where their entire life unfolded before them, not in judgment, but in understanding. Some report seeing not just their lives, but the impact of their actions on others rippling out like echoes. That level of awareness, that panoramic perspective, is consistent with what spiritual practitioners describe when accessing the records. It's not storytelling, it's a transmission of memory beyond time. Then there's the mystery of intuition. How does a mother sense that her child is in danger from miles away? How do some people just know when something isn't right before it happens? These phenomena hint at something deeper than logic. They suggest that we are already connected to a field of information much larger than ourselves. That we're not tapping into guesses, we're tapping into memory. And maybe that's the most important part. The Akashic records don't ask you to believe in something new, they ask you to remember something old. To consider that perhaps, just perhaps, the universe is not cold and random, but conscious and intentional. That your thoughts, your choices, your very essence are not fleeting moments lost to time, but part of a living record that holds it all. Science hasn't caught up yet, but it's getting closer. And when the gap between science and spirit finally closes, we may discover that the greatest truths were never hidden. We just stopped looking in the right place. From the moment you were born, the world began telling you who you are, not with curiosity, but with certainty. It gave you a name, a nationality, a religion, a school system, a set of beliefs, and a long list of rules. It taught you what was real, what was imaginary, and what was dangerous to even consider. And somewhere in that long list of silent agreements, it slipped in one message louder than the rest. Forget. Forget who you are. Forget what you've lived. Forget where you came from. Forget what you know. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect of growing up in the modern world. It was part of a larger system. A system built to sever your connection to anything that would make you powerful, anything that would make you sovereign, anything that would remind you that your soul has a memory far deeper than your current name, job title, or government-issued identity.
Because someone who remembers who they are cannot be controlled, and control is the currency of the world we live in. So instead of wonder, you were given obedience. Instead of intuition, repetition. Instead of soul work, school work. You were taught to look outward for answers and to mistrust anything that came from within. If you had visions, you were called imaginative. If you had past life memories, you were told it was fantasy. If you felt deeply connected to things you couldn't explain, you were asked to forget. All while being sold a version of reality so flat, so mechanical, that anything sacred was reduced to superstition or entertainment. This is why the Akashic records feel so distant to so many, not because they are inaccessible, but because your mind was trained to reject anything that can't be proven by systems designed to keep you small. You were told that truth comes from authority, that knowledge is something to earn, and that wisdom only counts if it's been peer-reviewed, monetized, or institutionalized. But the soul doesn't work like that. The records don't either. The truth is, you've already accessed them. You just didn't call it that. Those moments of profound clarity that seem to come from nowhere, the sense that you've known someone forever, though you only just met, the gut feeling that saved you, the flashes of insight in dreams, the déjà vu that made no sense, the irrational pull to a certain place, culture, or time period. These are not glitches. These are fragments of a memory you were told to erase. But memory doesn't die. It waits. Beneath the noise of your everyday programming, the soul still remembers, and no matter how much culture tries to silence it, it finds ways to speak, through art, through synchronicity, through breakdowns that force you to rebuild, through grief that cracks you open enough to finally feel something real. The forgetting was strong, but the remembering is stronger. And here's the part that stings. The world never wanted you to know this. Because someone who remembers is dangerous. They don't obey as easily. They don't chase empty success. They don't play roles they didn't choose. They see through the illusion, and worse, they help others see through it too. That's why mystics were burned, why shamans were silenced, why the wisdom keepers of indigenous cultures were erased or rebranded. It was never about disbelief. It was about suppression. But the system is breaking. Cracks are forming in the foundation. More and more people are waking up from amnesia and asking questions that can't be answered by textbooks or news anchors. They're sensing something deeper. And once that process begins, it cannot be reversed. Because once you begin to remember, you realize how much you've forgotten. And with every piece that comes back, so does your power. You weren't meant to stay blind. You were meant to wake up. The Akashic records were never hidden. You were just taught not to look. But now you're looking, and that changes everything. Remembering is not about going back. It's about going within. The Akashic records are not somewhere out there in a distant dimension guarded by mystics in flowing robes. They are right here, folded into your very being, encoded in the stillness between your thoughts. Accessing them doesn't require ritual so much as it requires readiness. It's not about performance, it's about presence. You don't need special words, just honest questions. You don't need spiritual credentials, just the courage to sit with yourself and listen beyond the noise. This is where most people hesitate. They expect thunder, visions, something dramatic. But the records rarely shout, they whisper.
And that whisper sounds a lot like your own voice, only deeper, quieter, older. It often arrives as a feeling, a flash, a sudden moment of clarity that comes when you least expect it and vanishes just as quickly if you try to control it. You can't force access. You can only create the conditions for it to emerge. Those conditions are simple, but they take practice, stillness, sincerity, and space. You have to make space for what's been buried. That means turning off the constant stream of stimulation, logging out, tuning in. It means choosing stillness when the world tells you to stay busy, not because stillness is trendy, but because it's the only place where truth can surface. It's in the quiet that the soul speaks, and what it says often defies language. Start with sitting with questions, not for answers, but for contact. Not what should I do, but what do I need to remember? Ask about a fear that's never made sense, a relationship that feels unfinished, a pattern that keeps repeating. Don't rush, just ask, and then be willing to feel. Sometimes the answer comes immediately. Other times it arrives later, through a dream, a lyric, a conversation that seems too timely to be coincidence. That's the record speaking in disguise. You may find journaling helps, a stream of consciousness practice where your logical mind steps aside long enough for the deeper voice to emerge. You may find that dreams become more vivid or that synchronicities start to multiply. These aren't random, they're signs that you're attuning, that your frequency is shifting into alignment with something older than time. One of the most powerful tools of remembrance is shadow work, because often what blocks us from the records isn't a lack of ability, it's avoidance. We're afraid to remember because we fear what we might see, painful choices, old guilt, unfinished karmic loops. But the records don't show you these things to shame you. They show you so you can integrate, so you can heal, so you can stop running from what was and begin moving toward what can be. This is also why the process can feel emotional. Accessing the records isn't just spiritual, it's cellular. The body remembers. Tears may come. Waves of grief or release might arise unexpectedly. Let them. That's not you breaking, that's you clearing space. You are not being overwhelmed, you are being reorganized. There's no single path to the records. For some, it's meditation. For others, breathwork, nature, or creative flow. Art has always been a portal, because when you create from the soul, you are speaking in the language of the records without even realizing it. Music, painting, poetry, these are not hobbies, they are frequencies, and sometimes they unlock more memory than any book ever could. You don't need a guru, you don't need a label, you need honesty, curiosity, a willingness to feel beyond the surface, and trust. Trust that what rises is rising for a reason. You're not making it up. You're remembering what was buried so deeply it began to feel like imagination. But imagination is just memory filtered through intuition, and the Akashic records live there, in that space between what you forgot and what your soul never let go of. Every time you remember a piece of yourself that you thought was lost, you close the gap between who you've been and who you're here to be. And eventually, remembering becomes a way of life, not a destination, but a state of being. You become the library, you become the channel, you become the bridge between the seen and the unseen.
And that's when you stop chasing meaning and start embodying it. Imagine a world where people no longer ask, "Who am I?" but instead ask, "Who have I always been?" Imagine millions of people no longer looking outward for worth, identity, or direction, but inward into the vast archive of their own soul's journey. That kind of awakening doesn't just change individuals, it changes the trajectory of humanity. Because when people remember, truly remember, they stop following scripts written for them. They stop playing roles handed down by systems designed to suppress. And that is where everything begins to shift. You see, the Akashic records aren't just about personal healing, they're about collective evolution. This isn't a private journey, it's a ripple effect. One person awakening to their soul's memory becomes a catalyst. They walk differently, speak differently, they become less reactive, more intuitive, they begin to create instead of consume.
Their relationships deepen. Their work becomes aligned. They no longer ask permission to be themselves, and that kind of freedom is contagious. We've been sold a lie for generations that we're disconnected, separate, competing. But the records tell a different story, a story where every soul is linked through an invisible web of cause and consequence, challenge and choice. What one person does ripples out across that web. Healing isn't isolated. When you clear karmic patterns in yourself, you clear them in your lineage. You break cycles that stretch back generations. You become the hinge between the past and the possible. And when enough people do that, the system doesn't just bend, it breaks. This is why remembering is so threatening to structures of power, because remembered people don't obey the same way. They don't fear rejection because they're not trying to fit into something broken. They don't measure success by external standards because they know what matters can't be measured. They start creating new templates for family, for work, for community. They raise children differently. They teach differently. They build systems based on soul, not control. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the old world begins to crumble, not with fire and destruction, but with irrelevance. It loses its grip because fewer people are feeding it. Fewer people are buying into the idea that worth must be earned, that truth comes from authority, that life is a grind toward a reward that never comes. Instead, people begin to live in alignment. They begin to trust themselves again. They begin to dream without permission. This collective remembrance doesn't look like a revolution. It feels like a homecoming, a mass exhale, a quiet, powerful shift where people stop performing and start embodying. And it's already happening. You can feel it. People waking up in waves, questioning things they were once certain of, leaving jobs, relationships, systems that no longer feel right, not because someone told them to, but because their soul whispered, "This isn't it, there's more." And that more isn't a destination, it's a frequency, a remembering that we are not cogs in a machine. We are infinite beings with stories that stretch across galaxies and lifetimes. We are not random. We are not powerless. We are not lost. We are just waking up. The Akashic records aren't an escape from this world. They are a map back into it with your full self intact. A map not just for you, but for us, for the collective, for the possibility that when enough of us remember, the world doesn't just change, it remembers itself too. All your life you were taught to look outward for answers, to find truth in books, in experts, in tradition, in systems older than yourself. You were handed blueprints for how to live, what to chase, who to be, and yet no matter how closely you followed the map, something never quite aligned. There was always a question you couldn't shake. Is this really it? That question wasn't doubt, it was a doorway, a signal from the part of you that never forgot, the part still tethered to the Akashic field, quietly holding the truth that your life is not random, your pain is not meaningless, and your purpose was never meant to be found in someone else's instruction manual. The Akashic records aren't far away. They're not locked behind esoteric rituals or hidden in distant temples. They are within you, encoded in your consciousness, waiting to be remembered. And remembering doesn't require perfection. It doesn't demand sainthood. It only asks for presence, for stillness, for the willingness to stop running from yourself and turn inward, gently, courageously, to face what's already there, the pain, the patterns, the wisdom, the power. When you enter that space, whether in meditation, in silence, in nature, in a dream, you aren't going somewhere new. You're returning to a conversation your soul has been trying to have with you since the beginning. You begin to see that your challenges weren't random. They were lessons. Your heartbreaks weren't punishments. They were activations. Every loss, every fear, every moment of confusion becomes a clue, a breadcrumb in the trail back to your own remembering. And from that place, your life begins to shift, not in loud cinematic moments, but in small, profound ways. The way you speak, the choices you make, the boundaries you hold, the energy you no longer tolerate. You begin to walk through the world differently, not with arrogance, but with clarity, with alignment. You stop seeking validation from people who can't see your soul. You stop living on autopilot and start moving with intention. And you realize, maybe for the first time, that your life doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reclaimed. Because you are not just a human trying to be spiritual. You are a soul remembering what it means to be human. And that memory lives inside you. You don't have to prove anything to access it. You just have to trust it, lean into it, let it guide you home. If you've made it this far, you already know what others are still asleep to. Don't stop here. Join Insights Academy through the link below and unlock more knowledge we can't say out loud here. You'll also receive a free copy of the Kabbalion for a limited time. Your story is not finished, your patterns are not final, and your soul is not broken. The Akashic records don't exist to predict your future. They exist to remind you that you are still the author. You always were. And the next chapter is waiting for you to write it from a place of full remembrance, full sovereignty, full truth. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood." If you liked this video, then like, comments, and hit the bell icon for future videos.